All right, this is our black level skills card. For those students that are reading at black level, that means that they're reading at the 4th grade reading level. The focus on the black level skills is comprehension, making sure that students have a really strong understanding of what they're reading and really adding beyond the basic kinds of comprehension type answers, moving on to in-depth kinds of responses. All right, so and the black reading level, we're working on comprehension, so providing specific information from the text for each of your answers. So when students are reading a literature or a fictional piece of text, while they're reading, I highly suggest that they stop every chapter if it's a chapter book and answer these questions. If it's not a chapter book, it's just stopping every 10 or so pages within a literature piece of text. They should be able to answer most of these 6 questions after every chapter or so. The reason for that is to make sure that they're not reading most of the book or the whole book without understanding what they've read. So if they've read half the book and they're like, I have no idea what I just read, it's a missed opportunity. So stopping every fewer pages, like every chapter or so, will help them realize if they need to go back and reread that chapter, just that chapter, and moving on, or if maybe just their interest level or where they are with that understanding of text is kind of maybe not quite there yet. So this really does help solidify and let them understand, oh, I get it. I can answer most of these questions. If they missed one, it's perfectly fine, but just making sure that they understand most of it. And most of it does lie into some of the basic kinds of questions like, who is the story about so far? Who are the major characters? How can you tell? Who are the minor characters? The narrator, is it first or third person? Are they saying I, and they're talking about the things that they're doing, or are they saying so-and-so in the story? The setting, where and when does the story take place? And what big thing is occurring so far? Sometimes you get to a chapter and there's not a whole lot going on yet because it's a lot of buildup. And if there's no key event yet, but the thing is that they have to realize if there is one or not, and can they recall that and pulling text evidence from the text itself saying, yep, this is my evidence. I know this is key event because in the text it says this. Being able to retell the key events of plot in chronological sequence. So making sure that they're staying as much in order in the way the book is being told as possible really does help keep those events in sequence. What is the theme of the text and how do you know? Again, these 2-part questions it's very important that they go beyond just answering the very first question, and that's something we as 4th graders are working on, underlining the question. And in this case, they would hypothetically be underlining it because they're not going to have this in front of them most likely. So what is the theme of the text? Follow-up question, how do you know? This is the evidence. Provide it with the text features or text clues in the story. And what other things have you read with a similar theme? How does this compare? So if you read a Geronimo Stilton book and you can't compare it with another Geronimo Stilton book, I want you to find a different book, maybe a different series book, but that has a similar theme. Maybe both books are talking about little animals that go on crazy adventures and those kinds of things. And maybe if their adventure includes learning a life lesson. So if that's something that is similar between those 2 books, how does it compare? So just being able to really dig deeper with what they're understanding with the book and taking away. Again, if they're able to answer most of those, they probably don't need to reread that chapter. But if they're not able to answer most of these questions, like 4 or 5 out of those 6, then they need to go back and reread that chapter. Again, if they stop every 1 or 2 chapters, it's a lot more doable to reread in case they don't have a good understanding of it yet, rather than reading most or all of the book and realizing that they just didn't remember many of the facts or the details in the book and having to reread all of that again. Moving on to informational text, nonfiction. Most nonfiction does not, well, I guess some of them are in chapter books and some of them are not. So if it's not a chapter book, just roughly every 8 to 10 or so pages is where you'd find probably a chapter book. So again, asking yourself these questions. And if you answer most of these correct, probably understanding what's going on in the story so far and moving on. But again, and it's perfectly fine to reread, use those close reading strategies. Reread the text. Reread. I reread all the time, and that's okay. But reread to make sure you're understanding. It's important. Vocabulary is also important. So when you come across a word that you're not sure of, using those context clues or just using the context of the text itself, what's going on in the story, and how could you better understand the meaning of the word using the sentence that it's in, the previous, and the next sentence. All right. Every level reader needs to be able to, or at least working towards finishing their chapter book in a week. So if you are on a chapter book and it's taking you 3+ weeks, we need to really sit down and think about, am I not spending enough time with this book? Or am I struggling to read it because it's just not fun? Or am I struggling to read it because it's just too much to read for me? So if you're coming across any of those type responses and we're just not able to finish a chapter book in a week, we need to maybe reconsider what kinds of books that we're reading, or just get hooked on a different kind of book, or spend a little bit more time reading. Lots of different possibilities there. At this reading level, we should be able to get hooked on a series or an author and go on a reading binge. So that means just pick a book, love the author, love the topic, read, and keep reading. Some kids will pick up a book and just won't put it down until the book is done. That's great. You don't have to do that, but I want you to be able to get hooked on a series or an author so that it's so much fun to continue to read that you won't want to put it down. Okay. Reading for an hour a day, concluding 30 minutes at home without anyone reminding you. So at this point, if they're reading block level books, they should be able to pick up a book at their leisure and just read. We want to try and reduce the amount of times that we remind them, but if we're still doing that, which I am, that's okay. Just remind them, but still encourage them that it's fun and it doesn't have to be like and feel like work. It shouldn't feel like work. It should feel like fun. All right, so reading different kinds of books, biographies, contemporary fiction, traditional tales, poetry, drama, science, and history. So lots of different kinds of genres of text we should be accessible. We should be accessing. We should be able to read silently and faster than you can talk, but with good understanding. So that just means we typically, when we're reading, we read faster when we're reading in our minds and our heads to ourselves, and that's pretty normal. All right, on the back of the skills card is our black level academic vocabulary. So within our literature or fiction text, these are words that we might see in our book, but then these are just words also that we might need to know and understand while reading our fiction book. So things like prediction and retelling, those are skills that we should be able to work on while reading our book. So if we're reading a book and we should be able to stop, pause, and make a prediction of, I think the end of the book is going to be like this. So just knowing what these words mean in reference to fiction or literature. And informational text, same thing. These words might come up in our nonfiction text, or just knowing what these words mean in reference again to that informational text. What is a section? What is essential? And what is a first-hand account, just for an example of some. Moving on to language. A lot of the language that we work on every day, things like simile and metaphor, which I gotta say these fourth graders have down. They can tell you that a simile is comparing two items or two things using the words like or as. A metaphor, also comparing two or more things, not using the words like or as. So again, if we're not sure of what these words are, I would refer to that big red book we have in the classroom, but if we don't have a big red book, then probably when we access technology on Google, maybe type in the word dictionary followed by one of these words so that we, again, address how to reference a dictionary. I think that's an important skill. And then what words do you know that come from these Greek and Latin number roots? So if this is something that could be done in addition to the reading, so reading, reading log, and then focusing on those questions, but then this could be something a little extra. Okay, so we know that our Greek and Latin word parts come from, we know that some words come from the Greek and Latin roots. So what other words do you know that starts with bi, which means two? For example, I would say bicycle. Another example would be quad, which stands for four. I could say quadruple, and I know what that means, just having that reference or that, that starting off point to understand. So again, just kind of making it a fun thing of just what do you know, what do you remember, and maybe adding on more as you read. So as you continue to read at Black reading level, you should be able to add on to the vocabulary and what you know. And that's why it's important to continue to read every day, because this might start with one word in each, but the more you read can easily go from one word in each to 4 words in each, because your vocabulary, your comprehension increases, and your comfortability, and your confidence in your reading skill. All right, so lots of information for the Black reading level. And yep, I will take a screenshot and make sure that these questions are available so that you have that here on hand. Thank you.